So let's talk about one of the most polarizing figures in modern Jewish history, Rabbi Meir Kahane. I mean, this was a guy who was a rabbi, a member of Israel's parliament, and the founder of a movement that people are still fiercely debating decades after his death. So the big question is, was he a necessary defender of his people, or was he a dangerous demagogue? Let's dive in and really try to understand the man and his ideology. This one quote really tells you almost everything you need to know about Kahane's whole philosophy. It's defiant, it's provocative, and it perfectly captures his approach to Jewish survival. Protect Jews by any means necessary, and who cares what anyone else thinks about it? For him, this wasn't about public relations or looking good. It was about survival, pure and simple, at any cost. Okay, so to really get a handle on Kahane's actions, we have to look at the worldview that was driving him. His entire philosophy, his entire being, was pretty much forged in the shadow of the Holocaust. And it was all built on this one incredibly powerful phrase that he made his own: never again. But what did that actually mean to him? Right, so this is Kahane's core belief right here. He was convinced that trying to reason with anti-Semitism was a total waste of time. He said in an interview back in the 80s that it's not a rational thing, it's irrational. Some people hate Jews for being capitalists, others for being communists. For Kahane, the why was completely irrelevant. The only thing that mattered was that this hatred exists, and you have to confront it with strength, not with polite conversation. And this is where we get to the central conflict of his entire career. Kahane openly, and I mean openly, despised what he called the Jewish establishment. He saw the mainstream Jewish leaders as weak, timid dwarves who were just obsessed with one question: what will the Gentiles say? He believed their whole approach was to just be quiet and not make any waves. His approach, that was the polar opposite. Be loud, be proud, and if you have to be violent. He wanted to completely shatter the image of the Jew who could be pushed around and replace it with someone who fights back. And this whole confrontational worldview, it eventually morphed into a full-blown ideology, Kahanism. Now, according to the Anti-Defamation League, it's defined as a radical form of Jewish nationalism which reflected racism, violence, and political extremism. So the key takeaway here is that his ideas weren't just about self-defense anymore. They were organized into a political movement that a lot of people, including many inside the Jewish community, saw as really, really dangerous. So, how do you take a philosophy like that and turn it into action? Well, to put his never-again ideas into practice, Kahane founded the Jewish Defense League, the JDL, back in New York City in 1968. Now, the stated goal was to protect Jews from anti-Semitism, but its methods, well, they were about to become infamous. Yeah, the JDL didn't stay a neighborhood watch group for long. It evolved into something way more militant, really fast. And while Kahane would often claim their actions were nonviolent, the record shows a pretty clear pattern of things escalating. There were bombings of Soviet properties to protest how Soviet Jews are being treated. Tragically, a bombing in 1972 actually killed a young Jewish secretary. The violence just kept growing, leading to plots and assassinations, including the 1985 mail bomb that murdered activist Alex O'Day. And all of this activity definitely did not go unnoticed. By 2001, the FBI's stance was crystal clear. They officially classified the JDL as a right-wing terrorist group, pointing to its history of plotting and carrying out acts of terrorism right here in the United States. And that designation really highlights the massive gap between the group's name, the Defense League, and how law enforcement actually saw them. But believe it or not, the JDL's actions in America were only one piece of the puzzle. For Kahane, the ultimate, final solution to the Jewish problem wasn't in America or anywhere else in the diaspora. Nope. It was in Israel. This was his grand vision, the thing that drove him politically and theologically. So for him, this was the real endgame. He argued that it's just not normal for a people to live as a minority everywhere. He believed that true safety, true destiny, could only be found when all Jews came home to their ancestral land. In Israel, he thought, Jews could finally be the masters of their own fate, completely free from the threat of anti-Semitism. And his vision for what that state should look like was, well, incredibly specific and deeply controversial. He had no interest in a secular democracy. He famously dismissed that idea as a Hebrew-speaking Greece. He wanted a state that was governed by Jewish law. He argued very controversially that making peace with Israel's Arab population would just lead to assimilation and intermarriage, which he thought would destroy the Jewish character of the state. So what was his solution? It was drastic: the transfer of Arabs out of Israel and the territories.
To try and make this happen, Kahane jumped into Israeli politics. He founded the Koch Party. And then, in 1984, he absolutely shocked the establishment by winning a seat in the Knesset, Israel's parliament. His popularity started to grow, but his extremist platform led to a major backlash. The Knesset actually passed a new law specifically designed to target racist incitement, and in 1988, his party was officially banned from running. That pretty much ended his political career right there.
Okay, so Kahane himself was assassinated in New York back in 1990. But did his ideology die with him? Not even close. The violence and the controversy associated with his name were far from over. In fact, his legacy would continue through the actions of his most devoted followers, and it would become even more polarizing after his death. And honestly, nothing captures this legacy more chillingly than what happened after the Hebron massacre in 1994. A JDL member named Baruch Goldstein walked into a mosque and murdered 29 Muslim worshippers. While the entire world reacted with horror, the JDL's official website praised him. They called his act a preventative measure and declared him a martyr. Just let that sink in for a second. It really shows you just how extreme the ideology had become. The consequences of all this were, as you can imagine, severe. After the Goldstein massacre, Israel officially banned Kahane's political parties, labeling them as terrorist organizations. And back in the US, the GDL kept going, with its leaders getting arrested in 2001 for plotting to bomb a mosque in California. A really grim pattern also started to emerge, a cycle of violence that seemed to consume the movement's own leadership. Kahane, his son, and his successor, Irv Rubin, they all met violent ends. So what we're left with is this legacy of violence and a deeply, deeply divisive ideology. The story of Meir Kahane really forces us to confront a tough question that's just as relevant today as it was back then. Where do you draw the line between defending your people and inciting hatred? And how does a democracy protect itself from extremist ideas without destroying the very freedoms it's built on? It's a huge question, and there are no easy answers.